Good evening, and welcome to another malicious version of Diatribes from the Voice of Doom. Now here's your malevolent and malfeasant host, Voice of Doom. Hello. Alright. I wasn't going to do much with Diatribes, but I figured I'd give you one for the sake of my most loyal fan. Since I've been meaning to do this, it's kind of a public service announcement, because I know it's very confusing to the average Joe what's going on in the world today. So thought I'd put a few snippets and snappets and BS and stuff I looked up, because I like to go beyond the usual media idiots who don't know what the hell they're doing. Before I get into my main topic, which I call mens rea, which means guilty mind, I want to say a few things about the recent gaffes of Petri Dish. Now, we all know about his recent anecdote about his past, about his Uncle Bozy, who was shot down and eaten by cannibals, according to Petri. I checked out a few things. Issue 1, Bozy was not shot down, his plane crashed. And Bozy was not the pilot, he was a passenger. It's very unfortunate that his Uncle Bozy was lost in the war. But when he says, my Uncle Bozy, and we used to call him that, let me just put a few facts in front of you. Petri Dish was born, unfortunately, in December of 1943. Uncle Bozy his plane crashed in May of 1944. So Petri would have been 6 months old when Uncle Bozy went down. So for him to speak so familiarly about his Uncle Bozy, he wouldn't have even known him. By the time he was old enough to talk, which would be about 10 or 11 years old, he wouldn't have known anything about Uncle Bozy. So let's just forget that. He's done many gaffes since then, so if I spent all my time on the internet talking about Petri's gaffes, it would fill the internet, and it would be there wouldn't be any room left, and it would take up all my time. So I want to do this little service to you people who may be confused about the travails of Orangey. I titled it Mens Rea, which means in Latin, guilty mind. It means, do you have an intent to commit a crime? Because the reason I called it that is because I was listening to the Supreme Court hearing on whether a president should have immunity for all their actions. And it's a good legal question that you might want to do when you're a junior or senior in high school and have a moot court, which I did. And we beat the opposition handily. But you could already tell they were all liberals and they discarded our ideas. I'll tell you about that one day. It was kind of interesting. It made me realize just how futile education really was. But mens rea means guilty mind. Now, do you have the intent to commit a crime? Or did it just happen that you did something or gave an order and people died, and now are you going to be held accountable? Well, with most presidents, no. Otherwise, every single president would be jailed immediately after they left office. There'd be no reason to be running for president knowing that you will be prosecuted for whatever decision you may have made, no matter how small or inconsequential, and found guilty and jailed. Every president's done things where people have gotten killed. Are they going to be held accountable for that? Well, I can make a decision if I was on the Supremes and say, if it's in the course of your presidential administrative duties and you make a wrong decision, you can't be held accountable. But if it's for your own personal aggrandizement or your own personal promotion, then perhaps you cannot get away with everything. And the Supremes, even though they aren't that bright, did bring up that subject. Well, can a president just shoot somebody? Well, if you're Clinton, you can, but never mind that. Let's get into the nitty-gritty before my time runs out. People may be looking at Orangey's travails and be wondering what the hell's going on. So I thought I'd break it down for you in a very simple way so that you understand. He's facing 4 different trials. Now, we already saw what happened in the first one. He was found guilty of inflating his assets. Mar-a-Lago is only worth about $5,000, and he said it was worth $100 million. That fiend. How could he say Mar-a-Lago is worth $100 million is a dump? Okay. So that we already know what happened with that. The stupid Erdogan and whoever he was, the lady, Letitia, got a verdict of $450 million fine, which was lowered to $175 million and will soon be zero, because we all know that on appeal they will say the whole thing was a sham. But let's go on with his other trials. He has a New York civil fraud lawsuit, which is going on right now with Alvin Bragg, and he was joined by a guy named Matthew Colangelo, who was deputy leader of the DOJ. So he just decided to forego his position there and go and help with the prosecution in New York. Now, we know what's going on. Nobody knows what the hell's going on with that, because they're saying, well, he made a clerical error, and he said that his payment for hush money came out of this account, and it should have come out of this account, and it's so stupid. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to conflate it into saying, well, he was paying hush money, and it's election interference, because if people had known everything about Orangey, they never would have elected him. By that logic, everything on this planet is election interference. Any bird flying and pooping on the head of a senator could be considered election interference. So let's get off that. That whole thing's going nowhere. But it's interesting how Petrie and his cohorts and his illegitimate gang of criminals called the DOJ always say, well, we have nothing to do with that. And yet all these people from the DOJ not only, they confer beforehand with the prosecutors in the White House, or they just join up the team. It's like, Alvin Bragg, you're nobody. So we need some big guns in here to prosecute this. Okay, what else is he facing? Manhattan hush money case. I already talked about that. And he also got fined $9,000 for being in contempt of court for violating his gag orders, which makes me gag. because he's the only one given a gag order and everybody else can do whatever they... We all know this. Come on. I'm not going to go into it. He can't say anything because they're railroading him. He's the one individual on this planet that he has no habeas corpus. He has no judicial rights whatsoever because they want him out of the picture because he's not going to go along with the program. Okay. He also has a trial with Jack Smith regarding January 6th because he said, I know you'll be going to the Capitol to protest peacefully about the outcome of the election. And that is a cardinal sin. He should be hung because he actually suggested that the election was not quite right. Now, that's been done on almost every election in American history. If you go back through the books, which you don't, nobody does, almost every election has been contested in some way or another, and there's always been discrepancies, there's always been malfeasance. Happens every time. It's happened since the beginning. I'm not going to go into details. You do it yourself. But the immunity question in the Supremes is what's going to judge whether this Jack Smith has any kind of case at all. Now, he's also trying the documents case. Because unlike every other president, Clinton, who builds a library, Obama, who builds a library, Bush, who builds a library, Bush second, who builds a library, every president has had the right to keep classified documents and declassify them. But Orangey has no right to do that, and he keeps them in the bathroom. He keeps them in the closet. Unlike Petri Dish, who keeps them in the garage and keeps them in Chinese think tanks and keeps them in Chinatown and here, there, and everywhere. He can't be tried for that because he's too demented, according to her. I think it's a her. Anyway, so Jack Smith is trying this documents case, which there's no case. Everybody knows it. And this immunity question in the Supremes may decide whether or not he can go forward with that. But now we have a Georgia election interference. Fani Willis, Judge Scott McAfee, and Fani, along with her buddy, pal, Nathan Wade, got into a little bit of a fracas with the fact that they were having an affair, and she was she was money laundering to give them nice vacations. Everybody knows that story. But there's still a trial coming, and she seems to be getting in more trouble than Orangey. You don't hear much about Orangey in the Georgia trial because Fani Willis is too busy trying to duck the law because of all of her little foibles. Now, what's this Georgia case about? Well, Orangey had the audacity, the utter impunicity, the gall to say, Georgia looks a little funny. Do you think you could check into it? Oh my God, it's election interference. It's really stupid. This trial should happen in the summer, and there is a freedom of speech issue, because to say Orangey can't even talk about any discrepancies in the election, or he is guilty of insurrection. So in other words, he can't talk. I mean, if it was up to all these judges, he would not ever be able to talk. Now, who are the judges in all these things? Well, the civil fraud lawsuit, we got the Arthur Engeron, a total shill for Petri Dish, and a guy that has no business being in the judicial system. He would be better off being a porter at the Nugget, cleaning ashtrays. He's much more qualified for that. In Manhattan, with Alvin Bragg, we have Judge Juan Merchan, who issued a gag order because Orangey was saying something bad about his little daughter, his young little kid, who happens to be in her late 30s and is a fundraiser for the DNC and has raised millions. And Mershon Juan, doesn't look like a Juan, but whatever, is also a shill. And we have the Judge Scott McAfee in the Fani Willis Georgia election. I don't know who's going to be the judge in Jack Smith's case because it probably never will come to court. So we don't have to worry about that. But he's got like 80 indictments still left, 80 charges. And each charge that is dealt with, he gets stronger. By the time all these trials are done, he'll have a 90% rating in the polls, which will give me hope for mankind or humankind or they kind, because even 45% voting for Petri dish scares the hell out of me. 45% of the people out on this planet, in this country, driving on the public roads would vote for Petri dish. So that can't happen. I'm sorry. I don't want to be biased. I don't want to be a partisan. But Petri dish is an evil, demented, corrupt, one of the worst people ever to darken the door of this planet, and should be treated as such. I don't even care about his habeas corpus. I don't care about his constitutional rights. He's a demon. And that's just the way I feel about it. I don't like him. I think you've gleaned that from my diatribes. I don't like Petri dish, never have. Didn't like him in 1976, don't like him now. So I thought that was kind of nice of me to give you a little overview of these trials, and they're so ridiculous, and everybody knows it. They're seeing he's being persecuted. One individual, many prosecutors have already said, we're not going to use this as a general rule, it's just against this guy. We're not going to prosecute other people for inflating their assets, it's just this guy. We're not going to prosecute other people for saying the election might have discrepancy. It's just this guy. Only him. Him. We're all after him. And everybody else feel at ease. Now, I'm going to end this with a coda regarding the recent riots and demonstrations on college campuses in support of Hamas, an organization that goes into a rock concert and kills a bunch of people, 500, 600, 700 people, kidnaps a couple hundred others, goes to a kibbutz and, puts a few babies in an oven and kills a few babies in their crib. And the students in the colleges are demonstrating in support of them. So they're doomed. Forget them. They're not going to live to see 30. But I have an idea. And it might be at the risk of being a little bit stereotyping. But people of the Jewish persuasion, in my experience, have a very good acumen for finance and things having to do with the legal system and Hollywood. It's just a stereotype, but it occurred to me that these students of Jewish persuasion are being persecuted. They don't feel safe in their campus. Now, they paid good money, $70,000 a semester or whatever, to get an education, and they can't do it because of the demonstrations. And they've already shut down some colleges, some people, they've already closed some down. But let's get to the point. Class action suit by every Jewish student in America. I don't care what college they go to. Get all 500,000 of them or 1 million of them and get a bunch of good Jewish lawyers and say we're suing every damn university in a class action suit. And we want $5 billion. And we're going to get it by hook or crook. And that would shut down all the universities and it would kill two birds with one stone. The Jewish students would not have to worry about getting their degree because they got a windfall. They got $10 million each. And that's my solution, but that's me. I don't think straight. So I'll leave it there. It's been 20 minutes. It's been pretty long, but I think I gave you some good stuff. And comment if you can, because that's the only thing keeping me going. And good night.